people in already. Hello to everyone out there who is joining us so far. Um, yeah, and just a little bit about the format. I'm going to ask you some questions, but really just going to let you kind of talk about what you're doing, what you need the most from people right now.
Yeah,
Maybe like some big misconceptions that people have about what's going on that you're seeing on the ground that's not being reported accurately, that sort of thing. So,
sure. Yeah, anything you want to ask. And then
okay,
I've got so
perfect.
much to say. I'd rather you like draw it out, but I'll just be like, "Ugh."
Just get it all out there. I'm sure. Um, yeah, it's we were talking because we're having our conference soon. In October is when our conference is happening, at the very end of October. So um we were talking about, if maybe you'd want to talk at the conference or something like that. And the commentary was, where in the world is Jason Jones? We never know where you're going to be, where you pop up. You seem to
It's
be everywhere all the time.
unfortunately I never know where I'm going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I'm
thought I was going to have a peaceful summer. I had a whole plan. I was going to get back in shape and get to know my family. That was the plan.
well,
Uh-uh.
and world events have other other plans for you, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, as people trickle in, I'll just say, if you are not familiar with us, we are Rehumanize International. We are a human rights organization dedicated to ending all forms of aggressive violence and protecting life from conception until natural death. You can see behind me some of those issues, and we have here Jason Jones of the Vulnerable People Project. Thank you so much for joining us. And just give us a little introduction about yourself and about your organization.
Well, first of all, my name is Jason Jones, and I'm the founder of the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization. And we have two programs that you may think of them as distinct organizations, but they're really just two programs of HERO, and that's the Vulnerable People Project and Movie to Movement. And the mission of HERO is very simple. It's to defend the vulnerable from violence by promoting human dignity and inspiring solidarity. VPP does that through influence campaigns for vulnerable communities facing ethnic cleansing, genocide, violence, but also through works of mercy. But we're a small organization, and not to undercut the aid that we do, millions of meals, tens of thousands of tons of coal over the past couple of years to keep people alive in the winter in Central Asia. But it really is small compared to the need. And so when VPP does its works of mercy, like now in Gaza, it's really to teach the truth about the human person and to inspire people to humanize these groups and to inspire solidarity with them. And then Movie to Movement does the same thing, but through film. We've had box office successes. We've made short films, narrative feature films, documentaries. This year, we finished 2 narrative shorts, and they're going to film festivals now. And we're in production of a feature-length documentary on religious freedom. And so that's what we do. But I just want to say that Rehumanize is one of my favorite groups. When I got the idea for VPP or HERO, I was a young soldier. I was an atheist, but I was like a right-wing atheist. I was like a libertarian, Randian, atheist, pro-lifer. And I wanted a consistent ethic organization that was like kind of from the right. And I kind of think most of my friends that Rehumanize your organization come from the left. And the older I get, and I've become a Catholic over the years, I'm been a Catholic now over 20 years, but I think those of us committed to defending the vulnerable consistently, whether we're starting from the right or the left, feel like we're on different sides of the earth. And as we get older, we drill deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually, as we get old, we meet in the middle. We find each other in the middle. It's been great. One of the reasons why I am so outspoken on war is because I come from the right. It's another reason why I'm so outspoken on migration issues. And I've always admired Rehumanize because there's some issues for you that don't take so much courage. But defending the child in the womb takes a lot of courage in your communities, as I see it from where I sit. And for me, I think I have an obligation to speak into my tribe where I feel at home and where I have relationships, where I think my tribe contradicts its professed values. And that's why I've always been grateful for Rehumanize. I kind of see us like we're two sides of the same coin. And it was been about a decade ago we wrote a white paper together on a strategy to abolish strategic nuclear weapons, which I have given to this administration. I've given to past administrations, but it's something I'm very proud of. And so it's great to join you.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, that white paper, I also am sending it all over the place all the time. It's amazing how often it comes up where we're like, we've done this, and really appreciate your work on that. But thank you so much. And we appreciate all that you do. And also, like you said, the people who you're able to reach who maybe wouldn't be as open to hearing from us. So it's a great synergy there. And one of the questions I have though is you referenced, movie to movement. And so you come out of the film industry really. So and you said they both work together, but I guess how did you get involved of doing like this direct action work coming from that, producing and everything film?
It's funny to hear you say that, like over the years, how people perceive me.
Yeah.
Because really, I started in the pro-life movement as a 17-year-old, as an atheist, 17-year-old boy going door to door as a soldier.
Yeah.
But it was as a young soldier that I wrote like this 40-year plan that I'm obsessive about. Like I'm, 33, 4 years into it now, 34 years into it. But in that plan, it was like produce movies, write books, run political campaigns to change culture. So my film comes out of my activism. It was just me thinking like, there's got to be a better way than knocking on doors.
Yeah.
I love knocking on doors. I've knocked on thousands and tens of thousands of doors, having thousands of conversations. And there's no better way to learn how to communicate on controversial issues than interrupting someone's lunch or favorite TV show to like throw a controversial issue on the floor and say, let's discuss this. But so I do credit, the years and years, I'd say, 13 years of grassroots activism before I got into film. That has helped me as a storyteller and as a writer and as a film producer.
Interesting. All right. So kind of going to more of how you got into a specific area. So I know the Vulnerable People Project, you do things all over the world. Anywhere there are people who are facing, hunger and oppression and all of these things, you have a lot of different areas where you're working. But in Gaza specifically, when did y'all start getting involved there, and how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, well, it kind of fits into the history. I know my story, and I see some of my friends up here. They know my story, but my high school girlfriend had a forced abortion while I was in basic training. I was 17 years old. That was my inciting incident into the pro-life movement. And then I was a young infantryman. So as a young soldier, that's when I really decided I wanted to order my life. If I could just spend my life doing anything, it would be to protect vulnerable people from violence, but especially children. And I wanted a consistent ethnic organization that only discussed like and commensurate issues to abortion. So we wouldn't address prudential issues. And there's nothing wrong with groups that choose to engage in all sorts of prudential issues. But I just wanted to deal with genocide, democide, unjust wars, and direct attacks on life like abortion, assisted suicide, and euthanasia. To me, those were like and commensurate. They were in the same category. But really with the idea of helping the most vulnerable people in the world when the world left them. And I had this idea that when I began to study social movements in college after the Army and graduate school, I realized that even the largest, most well-meaning NGOs at the end of the day are captured by money and interest because they just have to survive. And I thought, when there are truly powerless communities that are suffering the most in the world, that serving them comes at a social, maybe even a legal or physical cost, they don't have any defenders. And I thought, well, who will stand with them? Anti-abortion activists, that's who. So the idea was, what if I founded an organization that really worked through the pro-life movement to engage in like and commensurate issues, not in a way that would abandon the child in the womb or back shelf the child in the womb, but would actually, at the same time, the idea was to bring support from the right or from conservative Christians and pro-lifers for issues like to become anti-war, stand up to genocides and democides. I thought it would do two things. We could draw advocates from the right for these communities that are suffering, while at the same time educating the broader society that if you see dignity in the child in Gaza, then you have to see a dignity in the child in the womb, while we're educating those who see dignity in the child in the womb to see dignity in the child in Gaza. And that's why, for example, today, well, actually yesterday, and my granddaughter was born yesterday, after months and months of trying, we distributed 515 cans of baby formula. That might not seem like a lot, but we just had our warehouse blown up a week ago, destroying tons of food and countless cans of baby formula. And we finally got the distribution on the day my fourth grandchild was born. But on the canisters of baby food, it says, from the child in the womb to the child in Gaza. Why did I do that? That was, I know very well there are those on the right who consider themselves pro-life, but that because of ideology, a dehumanizing ethno-nationalist ideology, they don't really respect the child in Gaza. So that was the idea. Now, why did we get involved in Gaza? Well, again, coming from the right, like, I am so grateful for my emotions and I'm quick-tempered and I'm spirited and I'm easy to manipulate. I'm the easiest person for you out there. You know, if you want to manipulate someone and rage bait me or whatever the kids call it, I'm so simple. And on October 7th, the first thought that went through my mind, and I'm embarrassed to say this to this group, but I was so emotionally moved by the horrible footage that we saw that the first words that went through my head were literally flatten Gaza. Now, this is I'm a guy that spent his whole life talking about just war theory and, targeting of, you don't target civilians, but it was just an instinct. It was just and then emotion. And I always pay attention to those emotions. And I thought, well, we really want to be involved in a useful way as people's emotions are going to be swept away. So in the first days, the first thing we did is we began securing synagogues in vulnerable countries, because we have a program that secures vulnerable Christian communities and other religious communities from violence. And we thought we should wrap these synagogues up. First thing I did. But within 2 weeks, there was a bombing of a church, which took me aback. And then I have a lot of friends that have influence and power on the right and in Israel and other places. And I began calling them and trying to reason with them and discuss with them how awful this indiscriminate targeting is. And we understand you have to go after the perpetrators of this atrocity. So this is where I was. But, by November, after the attack, it was just obvious that this was a war of ethnic cleansing. And it's hard to say. You don't want to say something like that because it's quite a charge. But I think it's undeniable at this point. It was obvious to me going into Christmas of the first year. And, and I think it was December 16th, 2023, 2 Christian women were shot by snipers, Israeli snipers, as they were coming out of church. A friend that I work with, a Christian Catholic young man who was at Catholic University of America getting his master's, his 18-year-old sister and his father were killed shortly thereafter. Then his mother and sister were wounded when the church was bombed. And then all of my Palestinian friends began losing moms and dads and aunts and uncles. And so we were asked, we normally never go wading in without being asked, because of the success of our evacuations in Iraq and Afghanistan and Ukraine, people were asking us to evacuate wounded pregnant women. And so that was the our initial project was evacuating wounded women who were pregnant, that had life-threatening injuries, to Egypt. And then from there, we just kept getting requests and kept growing our programs. One of the things that we do at VPP, we're not the World Food Program. We're not, a $1 billion a year organization or a $50 million organization. So one of the things that we really try to do is fill in the gaps with things large NGOs won't do. So we've been delivering hot meals to orphans, thousands of hot meals. And every Christian every week gets a hot meal from us. We provide the water. Just this week, we did ices and clown shows. And we're going to be doing some really big things to cheer up the children. We really focus a lot of our time and energy just trying to bring joy to the orphans, the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of orphaned children and children missing limbs in Gaza. We really just do our best. And I've been petitioning for permission to go in myself. We have a crew there. I keep getting denied. But I do think in the coming weeks and months, I'm going to get approval to go into Gaza. And we have a very special program, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's really just simply designed to bring joy to the children of Gaza, even if it's just a smile. I don't know if you saw our icy video, but just to see kids like have smiles or laughing and dancing with the clown show, it really just, as I've been a father since I was 18, I was a teen parent. I have 5 siblings I'm the oldest of, and I have 7 kids, and I've been changing diapers since I was 2. So I've been kind of protecting and caring for children since I see everything I do through just kind of like a big brother or dad or grandpa. And so, yeah, for me, just to see kids laughing and eating ices, and man,
Yeah.
that's something you're not going to see the larger NGOs do.
No, I saw, and it was really neat that you had like almost like an ice cream shop set up happening where the people were coming.
Type
They
into
were
them.
so excited about that. And oh, Tony, I think we're got you there. Um, but yeah, that was just a really cool thing that you were doing. And I'm trying to post.
Our team, while you're doing that, our team
Yeah.
found a damaged building, but that it was still stable.
Mhm.
And there was an old ice cream parlor or something. It looked like an ice cream parlor.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
set it up and then they went to the camps and met the children where they were. And that's one thing we do that's different too. We make home cooked meals, hot meals. We don't make people walk across, this no man's land of desolation and destruction, burning up all these calories in the hot sun and at great risk to themselves. We really just kind of show up like Uber Eats,
Gaza version.
Yeah, and we're kind of like FedEx too, because our teams take a picture of every single delivery,
Hmm.
for our just accounting purposes. So my wife's like, you're like the Amazon of Afghanistan and Gaza. Unfortunately, I don't get a yacht with that like Jeff Bezos.
No, not as lucrative when you're
But I would rather be the Amazon of Gaza and the Uber Eats of Gaza than anywhere in the world.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit because from the outside, it's very hard to get an understanding of like the logistics that go into getting food into Gaza. And then obviously you just had one of your warehouses was bombed, I believe. And so you lost a lot there. And so replenishing that, like what is going into making all of this happen?
That's really a good question. People don't know. A lot of it is relationships. I spent a lot of time over the past 30 plus years building friendships around the world. And just this week, we're getting a child that was wounded out of Gaza at the request of a very prominent media personality. I won't say who, but this child's whole family was killed. I don't know what her relationship with this child was, but we were able to get this child out. And if you knew what it took, like it involved like kings and billionaires and senators.
Wow.
And to get one child out of Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
what does it take to get ICES into Gaza? Well, you have to work with logistics companies. You have to it's getting money to places. It's getting, food and people into places and out of places. And how do you do that? At the end of the day, in places like this, it's relationships. Sometimes we do contract former military people to help us with different evacuations or rescues. And that's where I got the idea for the ice cream truck, actually. I said, guys, when we go into a place, we want children to see us like the ice cream man, not Delta Force. Like no tactical watches, no flags on your hat. Like you need to come in there like Uncle Bob. These people have seen a lot of war and a lot of violence. They just need a strong, gentle presence. But I also say, like, look, we're not that. It's not what people think. Like we rescued nuns from Khartoum and 800 Christians. Even the most like military contracting companies didn't know how to get this religious order out of there. We were able to do it along with 800 other Christians. How did we do it? I'll just say what we do is Rick's Cafe from Casablanca. If that makes any sense. A lot of it is friends. And we even used the idea from Casablanca letter of transit to evacuate a democracy activist from Afghanistan. We asked a powerful member of the government, I won't say the name of the government is not to trigger any censorship of the show, but
Right.
who governs Afghanistan now. We asked a prominent member to give us a letter of transit for this young activist, just saying whoever holds this can leave with no questions asked of their identity or anything. I got that idea from Casablanca because I always said we're Rick's Cafe. And
Yeah.
just like I got the ice cream truck idea, like, well, rather than be the metaphorical ice cream man, we're bringing ice cream trucks into Gaza. We're preparing for when the ceasefire happens. We're going to bring in 100 ice cream trucks just for a year. As all the big aid organizations come and all the money in the world floods, what we want to do is in the nooks and the crannies of that all, begin trying to address the PTSD, the severe trauma, with just coloring and toys and clowns and music and ice cream. So, but to your point, it takes a lot to get the ices into Gaza this week, and the baby formula this week required me going to the region twice in the past several months, meeting with a lot of folks, building relationships, and then, through those friendships, being able to do something like give a kid an icy.
Yeah, that's amazing that all of the interconnected parts that had to happen. And I guess my question for you is if someone is hearing this and they're like, that sounds so cool, and I would love to be a part of doing something like that, like, what would you say to someone who's maybe young, starting out, doesn't know what that path could look like of trying to be involved in a movement like this?
Yeah, people often ask when we pull off some wild things that we pull off. They go, how do you do it? And I don't even know. And my staff will go, how did we do it? It's the Holy Spirit action plan. When people come to work for me, I tell them, and this is really true. Okay, I shouldn't tell everyone this, but it's true. When people come to work for me, I say, you are going to be scandalized after a couple of months working here, because you're going to realize that Jason Jones does literally nothing. No, I don't do anything. God does things right next to us. And then we point and go, look what we did. I mean, that's really it.
Yeah.
Time and time and time again, when we have these successes, there's no real explanation for it. The pieces always seem to fall in place. Sometimes they tragically do not. That's the spiritual exercise of this work. There's a lot of sorrow and there is a lot of failure. I'll own all of our failures. But when these kind of tremendous successes like what we had in Afghanistan and other places, people saw this and they were scratching their heads going, how in the world is VPP doing this? We really didn't even know. And I will say, well, you ask, what would I tell a young person? What I really do is, since I was a 17-year-old soldier, and my captain taught me this, is I write down what I'm going to do, and then I do it. I mean, it's that simple. Now, I put all of the steps to achieve an objective. And I always, when someone new comes to work for me, there's something that people do. Some of you probably do this too. A lot of people do this. When they attempt big things, they give themselves excuses for failure baked into the plan. Subconsciously, they'll give someone that's not trustworthy or reliable a task that they know they won't complete. Or they give other people veto over their success by giving them a task that is a necessary condition for achieving a goal. So that because they have a fear of failure, which I have as well. But you should never, when you have a goal, you should never give anyone veto authority over your success. That means when you build out a plan, every step of the way, you need partners and stakeholders, and it takes a lot of people to get things done. But for example, if I'm trying to get food into Gaza, I'll find 12 logistics companies and let all 12 know I'm working with all 12.
Yeah.
And then make them compete and pay attention to how much the other's charging me and how fast they deliver when I ask. So you have to build out these systems so that not one person can veto your success. Also know you're going to fail. My mother-in-law once said something really beautiful to me. I was just heartbroken over this failure I had. And she said to me, she's Chinese, so, Chinese mother-in-laws are tough. And she said, Jason, you know what the difference between you and Bill Gates is? I'm like, oh, here we go. I kick a man while he's down. And she said, he's failed a lot more than you.
Dang.
And so, we're trying to do really great things, daring things. And we're going to fail. It's going to take a lot longer than we have hoped. So we need to just, as Chesterton says in Battle of the White Horse, we have to have hope without a hope. We have to be able to move through the darkness. We'll go through despair and acedia. We'll become despondent. We'll question our faith. All of these things will become cynical. I choose to be sanctimonious instead of cynical. That's my new pose. I'm just going to be sanctimonious. But, it's a spiritual exercise. I love this community because all of us are oddballs. We don't make sense to people. And a lot of the issues where we work, people scratch their head. We're unusual to them.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. And it's not that we're not consistent. It's that we're consistent in a world that's inconsistent. So we're the strange people.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of work to do. And just say you're going to do something, do it, build a plan, give yourself reasonable milestones so you're not dilly-dallying. Achieve your milestones. Don't give other people veto over your success. That's how you make a movie, and that's how you evacuate someone from the most remote part of Afghanistan. Is you make a plan starting with the end in mind, working your way back with the steps, then working the steps forward, and never skipping a step, and never making excuses, knowing it's going to be hard. And that's, of course.
I think that's really great advice, like you said, for all the things that we do in life, and especially if you're trying to make a big difference, like you guys are all over the world. But again, specifically in Gaza, because there are going to be huge setbacks, right? Like because you are in an active war zone, things are going to be constantly derailed. I'm sure, as you have experienced over and over again, and so. I know you touched on this a little bit, but like, how do you keep from getting discouraged by that when you lost your warehouse last week? Like, how did you just not all of that formula? So much formula was gone, and then you were able to get more in, so quickly. So,
well, we're family, so I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Man, that was 2 people died.
Yeah.
And then you ask yourself, if I wasn't doing this, would they have died?
Yeah.
You ask yourself, like, they worked for a logistics company that we contracted. So they were in Gaza, and that company lost over 50 people. But that warehouse and that location was to stage baby formula for VPP to distribute. So you ask yourself all these questions. Am I a fraud? People tell me how great I am now. I'm not used to that, right? For the first 2 years of doing this work in Gaza, it was not, I don't really care. My favorite play is Cyrano de Bergerac, and my favorite novel is Harrison Bergeron. So at the end of the day, like when the crowd is yelling at me, I'll just dance and laugh at them. So I don't mind, but it has been a little startling. Something's happened the past couple of months where a lot of places, a lot of people are saying very nice things about me and VPP. And first 2 years, they were saying a lot of weird things about us. There's no basis in reality because we're just trying to feed Palestinian children, But yeah, it's hard. That's why I call it a spiritual exercise. Afghanistan was hard. We lost a lot of people we were trying to save. We didn't save, but people just know all the people we saved because I don't email my donors and say, hey, guess what? That family in Herat, they got killed last night before we could evacuate them. That's not a good email.
Yeah.
But just when these 2 boys died, and we lost a young man in Nigeria last month, was shot guarding seminarians through our vulnerable parish program, left 3 small children and a wife. So then you ask yourself, it's why am I doing this? Who told me to do this? Why? Who gave me permission? When I was younger, I would say, no one needs to give me permission. I'm doing what I want to do. Now I'm older and I'm like, wait, so it's not easy. It's sort of like you're the dog that caught the car it was chasing. And then you're like, now what? And then now you can't quit because you've built these systems, these logistics. So that is all to say, to serve the vulnerable is to become vulnerable, as Rene Girard, the great Catholic anthropologist from Stanford, said. And if the only skin in the game I have is my heart gets broken, then that's the skin I have in the game. But I'm dealing with people with broken hearts, broken bodies, broken minds and spirits. So at the end of the day, I do see that these setbacks, these challenges, the acedia, the despair, after Afghanistan, I don't even want to say how hard it got for me. I mean, we're still in Afghanistan. We're still involved in evacuating, resettling, and harboring and hiding vulnerable minorities and former American allies. But I'm Catholic, and I thank God that I'm Catholic. No offense to any other religious tradition. I don't know them very well, but I would say that from where I'm sitting, I don't know if any other faith could help me understand the problem of human suffering the way Catholicism does. And so I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for my understanding of the mystical body of Christ. And that when one part of the body suffers, then we should suffer too. So when I suffer, sometimes I ask myself, why am I broken up over this? It's just two guys on the other side of the world. All these things go through your mind. I'm like, am I a baby? Am I emotional? Am I dramatic? So how did I handle it last week? I couldn't sit still. So every night when I prayed and put my family to bed, I'd meet my friends at the bar. Fortunately, I live in hill country of Texas, so there's live music every night. And I just told my friends, I just cannot sit alone. I just don't want to think.
Yeah.
Let's hang out tonight, and I did that every night last week.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that's really important, though, is maintaining the relationships that you have, to have people around you to lift you up, but to not try to do this in isolation and alone. And I think a lot of us, too, just people generally kind of have a tendency to isolate when things get hard. We kind of tend to like close in on ourselves, but having that network and having those people there to support you, I think, is really important. And I'm glad that you did have them and you had people you could reach out to that, could be there to support you.
And on that note, I really do. I am blessed with the best friends and the best community. That week at Mass, I've been gone for months, and my priest saw me. I just shook his hand as we were leaving Mass, and he said, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" I heard what happened. And like 10 people in my parish said the same thing.
That is, yeah.
So and I travel the world, and everywhere I go, just because of the nature of my work, I have close friends, and I'm just blessed with good friends.
Yeah.
That's the greatest. I'm rich with children and friends, which there's nothing else you want to be rich with.
Amen. So you said something interesting, and I want to go back to just a little bit, kind of talking about the war more generally, that for the first few years, people saw you in Palestine, saw you working with these kids in Gaza, and there was sort of a different tone to that. Like people were more suspicious of people who were speaking out for Palestinians, for these, children in Gaza. And then there's been a shift, in the last few months, which I think is pretty perceptible, especially with like the images coming out of the children who are starving and, all these kind of things. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of the philosophy of war, right? And you kind of touch on this a little bit at the beginning, like after October 7th, you had this idea of, okay, Israel has, the unjust war theory, like it makes sense, they can respond, they've had this thing, there's hostages, all these elements. But then there's also the concept of like justly running a war, prosecuting a war, and that there was a sort of perceptible shift of, okay, even if this war had a just rationale, it's now shifted to being, like you said, going into a genocide. So you said, I think earlier, that it was pretty early on that you saw that things were on the ground were not, I guess,
2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, it was
within
obvious.
2 weeks. So what was it? Just like the bombings of civilians, or kind of talk us through like what
targeting churches, targeting mosques, targeting hospitals, targeting schools.
Yeah.
To quote the great moral philosopher Bill Burr, Bill Burr, the comedian, he said, they keep saying they're using human shields. He's like, what? You got to work around that. You got to work around that. Like, you got to work around that. Like, I was
Yeah.
an infantryman. My son fought in Iraq and Syria. My dad was an infantryman. My grandpa was an infantryman. You got to work around that. But this is a long subject. It could become very deep. But when we go back and we look to the whole post-Ottoman world and the way the nation states were created, and to the Queen's Commission in 1909, all the way to Timber Sycamore, and I think it was during the Obama administration, we have it's much more complex than just it started on October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
And those of us who are trying to be a prophetic voice for the vulnerable, shouldn't allow ourselves to be boxed into the matrix. We shouldn't, I'm not going to play their games. Like, I'm going to look at this conflict in totality.
Mm-hmm.
And I want all of the people I've worked in the Middle East for 30 years. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm very close to, more than most people ever meet, these communities. I'm close to the Yazidis, the Kurds. I have friends I'm on the phone with a friend who's a settler in Bethlehem. Like, I got to take another call. This happened last week. My Palestinian Christian friend who's being abused by settlers was calling me on the other line. And, I am sort of this old school, I guess the Gen Zs would call me an old school boomer liberal. Like, what I mean by that is I believe in classical liberalism. Can't we all get along? I would like a one-state solution, which obviously is never going to happen. Therefore, we fall back on a two-state solution. But I don't, as an old school boomer, although I'm Gen X, but you youngsters say we're all boomers. The idea of an ethno-nationalist state is not attractive to me. Nor are two ethno-national states. My friend who's a Palestinian Christian says she supports 3 states. I go, 3 states? What's that? She goes, yeah, one for the Palestinian fanatics, one for the Jewish fanatics, and then one country for the rest of us. And I said, the 3-state solution sounds great. Just we got to put your state cannot be between those two guys. That would be no good. But it's just a very complex reality. And I've written a lot about this, but just for the sake of this show, without getting into prudential policy prescriptions, it doesn't take too much to say this is clearly an ethnic cleansing. If you don't want to call it genocide, you can nitpick the legal definition of what does genocide mean. It has to prove intent. I think it's pretty easy to prove intent, but I'm not even going to I'll say, okay, but how in the world can you deny it's an ethnic cleansing? You have President Trump saying, let's send them to Sudan. I work in Sudan. Libya is one of 2 countries we don't work in at VPP that we want to work in. Yemen and Libya. They're hard places.
Yeah.
We're really scratching and crawling to get in there. But I'm sorry, I was distracted by trying to read. Someone's making some interesting points there.
You saw the comments in here.
Yeah, it was a really interesting comment. So they are openly advocating ethnic cleansing. Most people don't know what ethnic cleansing means. They'll say, no, when you say you're going to move 2 million people to Egypt, and they go, why won't Egypt take 2 million people? Why is it the MAGA people who are so upset about migration and our $27 trillion economy want to tell Egypt or Jordan to take 2 million people? Number one. Number two, why should Jordan and Egypt participate in an ethnic cleansing? Why don't we just give Eastern Ukraine to Russia and tell the Ukrainians to move to the big old Ukraine? There's a lot of Ukraine. Europe's so big. Why don't the Ukrainians go somewhere else in Europe? You will hear people say, and this is the racism in this, there are all these Arab countries. Why don't they just move? Like, okay, why don't the Italians, there's so many European countries, why don't the Italians just move to Sweden? They want to erase their identity. They want, they don't want them in the Middle East. They don't want them in Europe. They don't want them in the United States. They don't even want their wounded children coming here. Where do you want the Palestinians? You don't want them to live where they're from?
Yeah.
This kind of ethno-nationalist mindset to me is boggling. And I just wrote an article at my Substack, the Jason Jones Show, where I talked about Gaza and conservatism. To me, as a conservative, I'm a conservative. Like, I'm the most conservative person you ever meet. I hope, because I try to be a consistent conservative. And what I mean by that is, what is a conservative in the West conserving? In my mind, it is a Christian vision of the human person is being made in God's image and likeness with an incomparable dignity and worth. And those institutions that were created through civil society over the past 2,000 years by Christians to preserve, protect, and communicate the truth of the human person. And to protect us to live out our vocation, which is very simple and uncontroversial, I hope, which is to love God and love our neighbor. That to me is what it is to be a conservative. So how anyone can call themselves a conservative, Christian, Catholic, whatever, and then watch a population eviscerated and dehumanized, which is deleting and denying the very understanding of the human person, the role of the human person, and why God created us in the first place. And then when you realize that the Palestinians, they get so mad at me for saying this. It's funny, I get trolled by my Palestinian friends for saying this, and then by the rest of the world for saying another thing. I will say them both. Number one, it is just true. The Palestinians are descended from the Jews that accepted Jesus Christ. All of them. Now, there were invasions and ethnic and migrations, but if you do a DNA, they're all descended from the people that were there at the time of Jesus. Those Christians and those communities founded by St. James himself, that's the same community. That means they all will have to ethnically descend from them. So you're a Christian Zionist and want to deny the dignity of these people and say they have to leave where they're from because taking one verse out of the Bible out of context and using it as sarin gas, to me is absurd when you're warring against the very people that descend from the families of the apostles. But the Palestinians get so mad at you for saying this. Palestinian Christians, when you say this, they will remind you what the gospel teaches, that we are all grafted in to one family, one tree, one covenant. And because they're victims of ethno-nationalism, they don't even like when I point out that they are ethnically descended from Abraham and from the Jewish families that were at the time of Jesus. The other thing I'll tell you that I get trolled about, so I can get trolled twice, is, you know what I love most about going to Palestine? The French fries. They have the best French fries. I always bring it up. Then people go in the comment box and go, what is this guy's obsession with French fries? They do have the best French fries, but one of the reasons I do it is when you go to the West Bank, or well, not Gaza now, but you go to the West Bank, it's the safest place in the world, like any place in the world. But we have in our mind, it's either like a nativity set, or it's radical fundamentalists that wake up every day marching in the streets, drilling and practicing exercises to kill Christians and Jews, which is absurd. It's ridiculous. It's my favorite place to be in the world, actually, is the West Bank. Love it. People get so mad that I tell that truth, that all of you would feel so much more at home in the West Bank than you would in Israel. And when they take Christians on tours to Israel, they get them so worked up and afraid to go to the West Bank, like going to the church of the Nativity, then get back on the tour bus. Let's get out of here. I mean, it's silly. It's really funny to me because it's the best place. It's my favorite. The Palestinians are it's a beautiful place. And yeah, I don't know. That was my digression. I apologize. I have ADHD.
No, it's really interesting to hear that part, which you do not ever hear about or see, or especially in the West, this does not talk about, other than, like you said, that it is a constant war zone, or the fighting and that sort of side of things, and never just the more human side, which I think is so important. I mean, obviously, especially us at Rehumanize, we want to see the humans that are being affected by all of this. So I think that's great to think about, French fries. And it reminds me.
I went with Reverend Munther, if you know the
Yes.
famous Reverend Munther, who Christ at the Checkpoint, and he's wonderful. And I went to his church. It's a Lutheran church. It's ad orientem. It was like, I thought I was at a traditional Latin Mass Catholic parish, but I was at Reverend Munther's church, after I went to Mass at the Holy Sepulchre. And then I went to meet with Reverend Munther for coffee and with his community after their service. And then he has children. And then with his wife and children, we went out for buffalo wings and French fries after church, you know? And it's just, I don't think most Americans really, I wrote an article called Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot early in the war, which was, I was being very sincere. And in it, I really analyzed myself on all of the ways in which I had been propagandized. So even while I was in Egypt, running Palestinians into Egypt for hospital care, and then interviewing them, we set up a clandestine recording studio because we didn't want Egyptian intelligence to know what we were up to. This idea that Israel is surrounded by hostile enemies is not true. The regimes around Israel are utterly indifferent to not the people, but the regimes of the plight of Palestinians. So we had to be very prudent. But while I was interviewing these Palestinians, I really was listening to my own internal dialogue. And I'm like, this guy's a jerk, you know, me. This guy's a bigot. I said, I should write this down and let people know how awful I am. So I wrote this article, Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot. I was really afraid for my Palestinian friends to read it because, again, I was very open and sincere. And but every single one of them thanked me for it. And but yeah, so I think all of us should acknowledge that even whether we admit it or not, we have been influenced by a campaign of dehumanization against the Palestinians. And it's something that we really, you can't even escape. I have been able to, I made a joke last week. I was with a bunch of Palestinian and Jewish leaders in Manhattan, and the beautiful people, you know, and I was, I have Tourette's. Like I tell jokes I don't even know I'm going to tell. So I was just saying that I don't really have Tourette's, but maybe I do. I just say things you shouldn't say in public. And like this, I'm about to say, I shouldn't even repeat it on camera. I shouldn't have even said it off camera. But I was joking with my Palestinian friends and my Jewish friends. I said, you know, yeah, I used to be an anti-Palestinian. I used to be prejudiced against the Palestinians. I mean, I really used to hold these profound prejudices. But the one thing that can liberate you from prejudice is getting to know a people. And now that I've gotten to know the Palestinians, they're all jerks, you know, but I'm not prejudiced because I met them. So I didn't even know I was going to say that. It just came out. All my Palestinian friends laughed, but they're actually like, they're such a beautiful people. They're known as the most educated people. I had a famous conservative leader yelling through the phone at me for my work that the Palestinians are stupid, that they're fanatics, that they're this, that they're that. Nothing could be further from the truth. Hamas was, we don't want to get into all who funded Hamas. We all know who funded Hamas, and we know why they funded Hamas, and we know why Hamas was created. The majority of Palestinians never voted for Hamas, never in one single political district. They never won a majority. They won a minority in every district. They won a plurality, but a minority. And half of Gaza wasn't even born when there was the last election. There was an attempt to wrestle control away from Hamas that failed. Only 6% of people living in Gaza voted for Hamas. And when they voted for Hamas, they didn't know what they were voting for. You know, are you going to hold people that voted for Hitler in 1933 accountable? They went to an election, they voted, you know? But again, only 6% of Palestinians voted for Hamas. All of my workers have been in Hamas prisons. Everyone who works for me has been in a Hamas jail, been beaten and abused by Hamas, and have lost family from the IDF. How's that from being stuck between two, you know? And this is the reality.
Yeah.
And my heart breaks for the young fighters on both sides. You know, we look at the IDF soldiers right now. The suicide rate is unbelievable for these young soldiers. And the trauma that the Palestinians have faced. Karl Popper said that it takes a community, I think it is 5 generations to recover from war. And the echoes of this violence are going to be shattering hearts for generations and lives. in Palestine and in Israel. They're co-sufferers. And one point I'll make too is collective punishment. It seems like we only accept collective punishment for the Semitic peoples. There are those that really have a virulent Jew hatred and anti-Semitism that want to collectively blame the Jewish people for the state of Israel. And there are those who want to collectively punish the Palestinians for what Hamas has done. And it's a mystery to me because I don't see people wanting to collectively punish the Russians. You know, I wrote an article called Semitic Peoples and the Mystery of Collective Punishment. But those of us, you know, who are committed to a consistent ethic of life, obviously, not only do I want to not see collective punishment, it breaks my heart to think that peoples in these communities will feel shame and embarrassment or self-hatred on either side of the conflict, you know, which is happening on both sides of the conflict. There are people that are feeling dehumanized, feeling ashamed, and feeling embarrassed.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you're seeing, I know it's much harder in Gaza because of the fact that, you know, it is an active war zone and also with Hamas control, but you are seeing people who are trying to speak out and say, we don't want Hamas, you know, anymore, please go home. Like you're seeing some protests there. And then in Israel, you're seeing a lot of protest, even with some of the families of the people who are still being held hostage are protesting and asking for a ceasefire. And there's young people who are burning their draft cards, I guess. And
can I address Reverend Ray here? Or Ray,
yeah,
Ray,
yes.
Ray, what I'm saying is that people want to collectively, you'll see online, people want to collectively punish the Israelis or Jews, right? And then there are those on the right or the Zionists that want to collectively punish Palestinians and call them the reincarnation of Amalekites. But I don't know in any other conflict in the world where I see people wanting to collectively punish, you know, the Sudanese or the Nigerians, or for the Hindu Vata in India that, you know, destroyed 300 churches this past couple of months, killing Christians and brutalizing Christians. We do not, I would not want, and this is a hard part for me. When you're telling people the reality of what's happening on the ground, and especially when this war ends, you know, I want to preface this with saying the Palestinians are an end in themselves. We don't oppose the genocide in Gaza because we're afraid it's going to lead to anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. Mm-hmm. Palestinians are enough. So that's why I don't like to talk about this too much. But I do think it's worth mentioning that there are those who are easily manipulated emotionally, like I am, that want to scapegoat, that want things to be black and white or to be easy. And where the great part of VPP, when I'm on the battlefield, whether it's in Ukraine and Russia, which I've been, or whether it's in Iraq with the Peshmerga and ISIS, which I've been, or whether it's been in the West Bank or our work in Gaza, I really try to see that I have no enemies. I'm not there as a soldier. I was a soldier. I'm there as a Catholic that runs an apostolate that's to advocate human dignity. That doesn't mean there aren't culpable parties and criminals and war criminals. Of course there are. But trust me, it's very hard. I can talk these niceties, but the reality is, you know, I swing like this, you know, and you don't want to catch me on the wrong day. You know, like the day my warehouse is bombed by the IDF and 2 of my employees die. That's probably a bad day to catch me. Yeah. And again, that's something that really takes me aback by the Palestinian community. If you go to our website, Vulnerable People Project, and see the voices of Gaza that we interviewed, the families we rescued, none of them were radical. None of them had hatred or malice. They actually all expressed pity and sorrow for the young. One girl whose home was broken into, she was abused. They dressed up in her underwear. They made videos. You can see it in our video. They danced around on TikTok in this girl's underwear. She was wounded. Her family was wounded. And she just really was authentically worried for these young soldiers' futures because they're going to be so traumatized. Trust me, that wouldn't be my response if you did that to my home and my family. So to me, I learned from them. They're better than me because even learning from them, if it were to happen to my family tomorrow, I suspect I wouldn't be so noble.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have a few minutes here to open it up to questions from anyone in the group. Is it best to have them type their questions or, okay, Rosalind's got something. I'll have her, go ahead, Rosalind. You can come off mute.
Hello, thank you for coming on. Um, I'm working right now with a group called the Consistent Life Network, which is a partner of Rehumanize International. And you really encouraged me to take a risk. I would love to spend time if you have the availability to come on to our podcast. So I'll extend an invitation. Lauren can help get in contact, and I can also post my email in the chat. My question, first of all, is not representing my organization's views, but it's one that I think is just navigating the difficulty of conversations on topics like Gaza. And it's called the Hamas trap. In pro-Palestinian activism, a lot of people talk about Hasbara, which is the Israeli face of being able to manipulate very skillfully people's emotions. And anti-Semitism, of course, is real. But like any state, they have interests that they push. And there is ambassadors, you might have heard of the famed Piers Morgan shows, which is like the Jerry Springer politics, as people would say. People get in there and it's a fight. Um, so my question for you is how not to fall into something we call the Hamas trap, which is making equivalencies between the two people, both siding it, because you don't want to simultaneously deny atrocities committed by Hamas, as you acknowledge. But at the same time, you don't want to very much fall into this idea of creating false equivalences, especially when it comes to power. What is your advice for doing kind of media, talking to people while still being honest? You said you swing wide. You often have Tourette's. You just say things that are inappropriate, which is a gift I don't have. People say I'm too diplomatic. Sometimes I want to be punchier with my words, and I'm not as bold. Um, and then also, second question, I'm going to be honest because I have a lot of left-wing people um, in my circles in pro-Palestine groups that are unapologetically like, I cannot condemn, Hamas primarily because given the conflict, given the hypocrisy of the West on the standards of war, I would very much think that they would do similar thing of the right to armed resistance for the Palestinian people. And of course, um, I would strongly disagree with that. I'm a Christian, actually, considering converting to Orthodox Christianity. I believe in nonviolence, but a lot of people see this as having what they call a luxury belief. So those are kind of two separate, but I think related questions of like, how do we be honest while also understanding the pragmatic reality of dealing with media and all these tricky details?
Yeah, so I'll get to your Hamas trap. I mean, it's very easy. First of all, there was just who's the John Stewart of Egypt. What's his name? My brain is frozen right now. I love him so much. Uh, uh, ah,
Yusuf, Bassam
Bassem
Yusuf?
Youssef. Bassem
Yeah.
Youssef. Yeah, Bassem Youssef was asked that question. What do you think about? Are you going to condemn Hamas? And he just lost his mind. He's like, you're not going to stop me at this Hamas checkpoint. Everyone that I know from Gaza has an antagonistic relationship with Hamas, right? But you're right. There's all of these red herrings. So this child didn't starve. This child died of an illness related to malnutrition. Okay, you got me. Uh-oh. So I think how you don't fall into Israeli talking points. First of all, there is no Hamas propaganda machine. There is no Pallywood. I mean, this is utterly insane. Again, the idea that Hamas is stealing all the food, it would take 150 container trucks to reduce caloric intake in Gaza by 25% if they were at 1,000 calories a day, which is still hunger. The amount of manpower it would take to steal, drive, protect, hide, and store food from 150 trucks a month It's just unimaginable with satellites and drones and one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world, allied with the United States and Great Britain, to hide 150 trucks this is all silly. So the idea that the images coming out of Gaza are in some way propaganda is absurd. Okay. 95% of the buildings have been utterly destroyed. So when people say, oh, no one's starving, you really think in a community where there's 2 million people plus and 95% of the buildings are destroyed, and you have militant groups, not only Hamas, but like Islamic Jihad and ISIS and the IDF and roaming gangs, you really think that this doesn't disrupt the distribution of food, even under the most best case scenario? It doesn't take much as someone who does logistics, trying to get food and medicine into war zones. The idea, I'm just going to go to like the Hamas propaganda, that Hamas is stealing this food is absurd. Does Hamas steal food? Yes. Does Islamic Jihad steal food? Yes. Do roving gangs of thugs steal food? Yes. Do starving people mob trucks? Yes. Of course. But does any of this have any overall impact on the caloric deficiency of the people of Gaza? Not at all. How many Hamas fighters are there left? It's between 20,000 and 40,000. So you want to tell me they're running propaganda campaigns in the West while stealing trucks and hiding behind buildings and running around their tunnels? It's all nonsense. When 2 Catholic women were shot by snipers and in church courtyard, there was no Hamas shield. They were not human shields. When the IDF just a couple of weeks ago aimed a tank cannon at a crucifix above a church, killing 3 Catholics, wounding the priest and 12 other Catholics, or when they dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on our church, where there's a tunnel under our church? No. Was Hamas in our church? No. When they flattened all of our hospitals and all of our schools, Christian hospitals and schools in Gaza, was Hamas there? No. Were there human shields? No. This week, as we speak today, the neighborhood where the churches are is being relentlessly hammered. Hamas hasn't been there for so long. The idea that there's in any way parity between the propaganda of the state of Israel and Hamas is unbelievable. There's no comparison. There's none. Now, that being said, are there those that will leverage the grievances of the Palestinians to achieve their objectives? Iran, other Islamist organizations. Yeah, but it's not for the Palestinians. You want me to think that the Shia Iranian regime cares about Sunni Palestinians? I can tell you, as somebody who is evacuated and cares for the Hazaras from Afghanistan who are Shia, who are forbidden to buy bread in Afghanistan, who are beaten, who are brutalized, and were just all expelled. Iran just expelled all of the Hazara that are their co-religionists from their country. You want me to think that regime loves the Palestinians? No. So there are those that will use the grievances, but they're not Palestinians. They're not. And I was with a group last week, a left-leaning group, and I said, we were talking about how to push Trump to do the right thing on Gaza. And he said, I don't want to give Trump a success on this. I don't want him to have this victory. And that's what was that expression you used about privilege or?
I'm talking more like radical. I would say there's a distinction I would make between a liberal and a radical leftist. I understand.
This guy was a communist. He was a priest. He was an Anglican priest.
Okay.
But he called himself a democratic socialist. But my point being, he said that he didn't want Trump to get the win on this. So my point being, that's just another example of somebody seeing the Palestinians as a means to another end.
Absolutely. They're an
end in themselves. By the way, so are the Jews and the Druze.
Yeah.
And the Jewish community, by the way, one of the great tragedies of Zionism is the ethnic cleansing of the Jewish community. Because the Jewish community is so ethnically diverse. But in Israel, it is an apartheid state. And it is not just an apartheid state that abuses Palestinians. It abuses Jews from Ethiopia, from Yemen, from Iran. They're treated as second-class citizens from Iraq. In 2010, this is something Rehumanize should really look into and research, is in 2010, Israel got caught forcibly sterilizing thousands and thousands of Ethiopian Jewish women in Israel. So this is an apartheid state that is involved in ethnic cleansing, but not just of Palestinians, but of Jews. And but all of these communities are an end in themselves. Now, what is their best interest? How are their competing interests served? These are all very complex and prudential issues that I have a lot of thoughts on. I write a lot about. But to me, that's not the big thing. The big thing is we recognize that this is a tough issue, but we draw a line in the sand at treating peoples and communities as ends in themselves, opposing collective punishment, opposing genocide, opposing forced starvation. And I think we're not asking a lot here. One of the things I was so grateful to Rehumanize for 10 years ago when I approached them on writing a white paper on abolishing strategic nuclear weapons, that was the decision I made because tactical nuclear weapons could be used in accordance with just war. So let's come up with a strategy that we could try to sell in the interest of the great powers to maneuver them to remove their city busting strategic weapons. That was a prudential issue. That's a prudential decision. And a lot of purists were upset. So like, no, all nuclear weapons. I'm like, well, let's just get there, but let's start with something we can have a broad base of support on. Same thing when it comes to the great challenge is the mess of the Middle East in the post-Ottoman world. All these borders were designed to make this an easy place for their colonial masters to exploit. It's just a fact. We can't deny the history. The Sykes-Picot documents were released in 1922, I believe. They were published in Arabic when the Soviet Union got a hold of these documents. They wanted to embarrass the West, and they published them across the Middle East. We know why we have the borders we have. We know why the borders are where they are. We know what the purpose was. And so we just have to acknowledge it's a complex reality. We may all have different agreements on how to solve this. And those of us who are Americans, it's really not our business. I'd like a new Sykes-Picot agreement, but I'd like the names not to be Sykes and Picot, maybe two different names. But at the end of the day, one thing we could all agree on is watching a live stream genocide is absolutely unacceptable. And we need a ceasefire. And we need to, as a world, we need a Marshall Plan, not only to rebuild Gaza, and we need a Palestinian state, because the state of Israel has demonstrated that in no way can they be trusted with the security of Palestinians. Ceasefire. Oh, and we need to really begin addressing the trauma and the brokenness of a community that has not only been brutalized, but has been done so in a most humiliating way. This is the first time an ethnic cleansing has taken place with the whole world watching. And so this is traumatic. And this is where I think we can all agree. But there's a lot of gaslighting from people with power.
Absolutely. And I find it's interesting is like when people want to acknowledge nuance, they find something they can agree on. But it's when you take a black and white thinking that leads to justifying, for example, the actions of Hamas October 7th or presently the ongoing genocide by the Israeli military, right? It's like all or nothing, and we cannot see the humanity of the other because we fear that it's going to lead to our own destruction. You might have heard of Ben Swibson in Reconceptualizing War and other thinkers. So that's very fascinating. And I hope if you have time, you can come onto our network, the Consistent Life Network. We would love to host you. Thank you so much.
I'd love to be on your show. And just to that point, I had a friend, a mentor, when I first went to Darfur during the genocide about 20 years ago. He said to me, Jason, you're an American. And as soon as you get off the plane, you're going to want to look for the white hats and the black hats and know that there's no one here wearing a white hat and there's no one here wearing a black hat. And if you think you're the guy that's showing up with the white hat, look in the mirror. You don't have a white hat on either. And that really is something I've come to understand is true. And it's also a severe responsibility for all of us who engage in these issues oftentimes without skin in the game, although we do because we're Americans and our taxpayers' dollars and our foreign policy establishment, our intelligence agencies are running amok. And that's forced us all to have skin in the game. If I was from Portugal, I'd probably just be fishing right now and not talking about any of this. But in a way, we do have skin in the game. We do have moral culpability because of the way the role of our government in all of this. But we have to know that we want to be really careful that we don't cause harm in our naivete.
I
And
absolutely.
that's my greatest fear in my work, is that through my good intentions or through my naivete, I can cause harm. And so that's something we're really thoughtful about. So we really try to limit our scope of activity to things that are caring for the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable places. Because I feel if when we do that, we're really limiting our ability to do harm.
Thank you so much.
And Jason, there are a couple of comments, a couple of questions in the chat there that you can look at. And then also I'll just say the one thing that you can address before you go at the end is just what we as a community can do to best support you and help the vulnerable people.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, just pray for us, pray for our team. It is very challenging. And I think all those miracles that happen all the time, it's just, we are blessed to have a lot of people praying for us. And one thing I'd like to do with Rehumanize is maybe we could do a distribution of food for you. If you guys want to fundraise into your organization, and then we could do a distribution with your branding on those packages. It's something we've done with other groups and other partners. It's something I really love to do. As you said, all of us kind of feel helpless. We're not. We are not helpless. Someone said, how do you, Virginia asked a lot of really good questions. Does limiting your scope also mean sometimes you're limiting from doing risky good? Yeah, 100%. I do think we're the most risk-averse organization in the world. We do a lot of wild things, but there have been times where to do some good could be a felony, like sometimes when we're trying to
Didn't stop Herb.
Huh?
I said that didn't stop Herb from getting, arrested.
That's true, but these would be more complex. Like when you rescue people that have been captured by extremist organizations, sometimes you're limited in what you can do to get them back. Does that make sense? And I am tempted to do things to get them back, but and so it's difficult, when it's prudential, and you're gonna have to recognize sometimes you're gonna make mistakes. I'll give you one example. I'll give you a real direct example. We had some Christian pastors kidnapped by ISIS in Afghanistan. They gave us 72 hours to get them $10,000. And we went back and said, which we always do, how about we just drill a well? You tell us the village and we'll drill a well, or, we'll do this or that. We're not going to give you money ever. We'll do what we're going to do. Just you tell us where. But they weren't having it. And I just told my team, well, I'm not sending those guys money because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in prison, number one. And number two, they're not going to harm the pastors. We'll talk to them on Monday. And they were killed on Sunday. So what if I'd have just wired them the money, What if we wouldn't have wired them? We'd have used something called Hawala. What if I would have done that? We could have saved their life. But at the end of the day, we paid for their funerals and we gave their family money. And all of that in the end was a bigger budget item than it would have cost to save them. But it would have been illegal for me to send money to those guys. It would have been illegal for me to use the means to send money in the way I would have had to send money. And I wasn't going to do that. And the consequences, what if I'd have taken that risk? Those men would be alive. So that's an example. And I have to measure that all the time. There were times where we've rescued girls from ISIS in Afghanistan where my partners have rescued them, where they've almost died. And but they haven't. And in those very dangerous circumstances, I veto it actually, so I have a clean conscience. And then my partners I know will beg me to let them do it. And then they do it. And they always do it again in a Rick's Cafe sort of way, nothing like people would imagine. They're always very clever ways, getting a girl to fake sick and dressing up as hospital staff and then admitting them and whisking them out the back door and taking them over a border, things like this. But we're getting into the weeds here.
Yeah, I think Virginia has one more question about some messages. Go ahead, Virginia, you can go on camera.
Hey, yeah, no, I have lots of questions because I ponder the nuances of things a lot, and how how do we not fall into traps of oversimplification and you know, what where do we draw the line? Like sometimes doing the right thing is the illegal thing. And also if you run a 501c3, you have to think about the fact that you're then risking all of your other operations. So I hear you on that. I just was thinking about, you know, how does one boldly make decisions? How do you and other people, if they want to chime in, boldly make decisions, knowing that you don't always know everything and that you are a fallible human being and good intentions are not always enough? Because we don't want to sit back and be afraid to make a decision all the time. And at the same time, we understand that there are consequences that we may not foresee for those decisions. So, you know, in the example of them holding the pastors, you didn't know that they were going to murder them. But at the same time, if you had given them the money, you don't know how many of other people they would have gone and killed with that money. So.
Right. And I did the right thing. I don't feel that's something I don't feel bad about at all. And I would do it 1,000 times again. So I would never have changed how I did that. I made the right, and that's how I have certain rules, and I have to respect my country. The last thing I would want to do is harm my country. The same thing when we would rescue Afghan SIVs. Our vetting process was much more sophisticated and detailed than the U.S. State Department's. We needed to know your commander. I personally would call and interview your commander. We would need all of your documents. If you were a pastor, I needed to know where you got your Bible education. You know, we did a very deep dive. And with the slightest suspicion or dishonesty or misrepresentation, we would ghost them immediately, and we would just wouldn't deal with them again. We're small. We don't have time for games. And I'm not going to put my country at risk while trying to keep a promise my country made to people that deserve that promise to be kept. So, you know, all of these things are challenging. But I would never let the difficulty paralyze me. You just kind of get thrusted into it. I did not ask to evacuate Afghans. I was asked to, and I began building a system to move Afghans overland when everyone else was thinking of planes. I thought that was not a good idea, again, because you need landing rights. You need millions of dollars, which gives other people veto authority over my success. So I built out systems of evacuation over land using my contacts and friendships that nobody could veto. So, but it was dangerous. And so people would have to understand, we would actually have them sign contracts acknowledging how dangerous this was and that they're agreeing upon it.
When you talked about, you know, juggling the fact that, you know, that not only in this line of work are you putting yourself at risk, but people working under you are at risk, and how to manage that, you know, not that I'm necessarily in your line of work, but I think about those types of things a lot. Again, like on a large scale, how do we continue to do good? And yeah, I guess the only thing that comes to me in that is informed consent, right? They knew what they were signing up for. They knew what.
We only help those who ask us for help. And then in the most brutal detail, we explain to them all the ways that this can go wrong.
Yeah.
You know, but again, like the hardest work in what we do is it's not in the work that VPP or our team members do. And it's usually not dangerous. Obviously in Gaza, it's extremely dangerous, and their partners in Ukraine and Sudan and Nigeria have danger, but that's not the hardest part for me at all. Actually, that's when it gets easy. I just saw a doctor that went to Gaza and said for the first time in almost 2 years, he felt relieved as soon as he went into Gaza. Why? Because now he had skin in the game. The anxiety of being a helpless outsider vanished. As he said, as soon as I went into Gaza, I finally felt peace. And David Mamet, the great playwright, said that writers write because they're, for the same reason beavers chew on wood, their teeth itch. And my teeth itch at children starving and being shot at, having their limbs blown off. And really the only time my teeth stop itching is when I'm working. And really the only time they really stop itching is when I'm working in a place where I have real skin in the game. But the hard part is when you take a side of a controversial issue like Gaza, there are my friends. I don't care what my Christian Zionist friends say, because It's just a shallow, bigoted, ethno-nationalist screed that's so repulsive I can care less. But for my Jewish friends that I recognize have real family history, real family trauma, real concerns, then they would think that maybe in some way I don't love them or I don't take their safety or their security, their interests seriously. That's the hard part for me. That's the only hard part for me, is the people I care about. Same thing in Ukraine. I've been advocating for a ceasefire since the day started, but I've been pro-Ukrainian. So I've had a very nuanced position. I think NATO's bears responsibility for ever increasing to the West. I think East. I think that Putin is a brutal dictator thug who made a ridiculous, unspeakably evil decision. This war is catastrophic. I've been to this war zone. I've been to the front lines. I've been to the hospitals and seen the amputees. I wanted this war to end from the very beginning. So the very Ukrainians that I'm helping in Ukraine with body armor or ambulances or insulin or all the ways in which we helped feel sometimes betrayed by me because I've been advocating for a ceasefire. And they feel that they're going to lose everything in a ceasefire. And so I don't want people I love and that I care for and that I serve and I've worked alongside to think that I don't understand their interests and their feeling. Hey, I do. And all of you have to do that on all of our issues when we're opposing abortion to when we stand up against abortion and we have a friend that was abused by her stepfather. And then in her personal narrative and her story, that abortion to her in a way saved her life. Or our friends that are struggling with infertility and they're looking for in vitro fertilization, they ask us our opinion and then we have to say, well, and then in all of these ways, we're hurting people we love. So people ask me, how do you do the work that you do? Was it your military experience or this or that? No, it's my work in the pro-life movement. Because being in pro-life in the 80s and 90s, I had to learn how to hold to an unpopular view, even as a conservative, especially in political circles in the early 90s. So how can I stand up for the Palestinians? The same way I could stand up for the child in the womb and as the chairman of the College Republicans in 1992. And I would have all the Rhino Republicans telling me, Jason, we appreciate your passion, but your fanaticism on this abortion issue should really moderate. It's okay to be pro-life, but keep that to yourself. Don't bring it to the party. I'm so used to all of that. I'm so used to having to tell people that I love that something that they think is right, something they did or want to do is wrong. So all of us have to experience the hardest part all the time. And that's our convictions in an intimate way hurt people we love. That's the hard part.
A lot to chew on there, but I want to respect everybody's time, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I have time for one question, then I have to go give a speech. I have to get my suit on.
Yeah, get your suit on, go. The last one, also from Virginia's here on the text, is just that is there a way that we can get messages to the kids who you are distributing these items to? Is there anything like that we could do?
Yeah, what we could do is print them inside Gaza and cut them there. We're not going to be able to ship anything in there.
Right.
But that's a brilliant idea. So we are preparing, I don't want to say too much.
Yeah.
But we're preparing to do some really beautiful things for the young people of Gaza. And it'll happen hopefully the next week or two, and you guys will see it. Makes the ices look like nothing. If you want to send any messages to print, my granddaughter was just born. I'm going to have a happy birthday, Lucia sign from Gaza.
I love that.
If there's any messages that you have, the whole goal is to let them know they're loved, that we're watching, we're seeing, and we care about their joy. Yeah.
Okay, I'll get with you and see what we can do to get that over to you. And thank you so much for talking with us, Jason. If people want to get in touch, they follow you, you're all over social media, Vulnerable People Project, Jason Jones Show, any other?
Yeah, I think I'm muted. So I think my website is vulnerablepeopleproject.com. My podcast, which has suffered because of all these wars, is Jason Jones Show, which I've been doing like one a month. I need to do more. And my Substack, Jason Jones Show, and Jason Jones Show X, Instagram. Our Vulnerable People Project Instagram is something I think you guys would all like, because we really try to keep it upbeat and happy. And We do show my own personal one's a little darker, but the VPP Vulnerable People Project Instagram, you see a lot of our successes. Again, with my own personal one, it's just me sharing everything, you know, just kind of relentless. And again, I just want to say how much I really do appreciate Rehumanize. And I'm so grateful for your commitment to defending the child in the womb. I know how challenging it is. Like, we're all oddball. I hope you guys don't take this the wrong way, but I think we're just oddballs in the same way. And it's uncomfortable. It'd be very easy for us to find niches to talk about issues where we will have nothing but love. And so I'm just so grateful for you guys to have the courage to speak about the hard issues and the hard places and the hard times. Because I'm a Catholic, but I'm going to quote Martin Luther. He said, if you preach the gospel everywhere and all the time, but except for where the devil in the world attacks, you preach the gospel not at all. And I think that if you preach a culture of life and if you preach human dignity, except for where you have influence and power, then you do it not at all. And all of us have great influence in our communities.
Yeah.
And so we have that real responsibility to speak into our communities because we empathize with them, we understand them, we know them, there's a trust, and we can pull them away from their inconsistencies to a more consistent respect for life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for going on. We'll let you go so you can get dressed and do your speech. Good luck on that to talk some more. And we'll get with you afterwards to get you the recording and all of that. I'll get all that back to you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.